Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, PTSD Awareness Day Act, Ms. Goehring.
The honourable member for Edmonton Castle Downs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to start by saying thank you to all the members in the House today. It's my absolute privilege to rise today for the second reading of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to share with you a little bit about why this bill is so important. As a social worker that has practiced in a variety of roles for 20 years, I have seen firsthand the impact of trauma on individuals. Children, youth, adults, and seniors can all be affected. I have worked with both the individual that has been directly impacted by trauma and then those family members, support people, caregivers, and professionals that are in their lives. As a frontline worker, Mr. Speaker, I experienced direct trauma, along with some of my social workers. Initially, although upset, we minimized the situation and talked about this as being part of the job. Our manager and supervisors were aware of the situation and within a few days brought in trauma support workers to do a debrief with our team and any other staff that were indirectly impacted. I remember being so thankful to have this opportunity to give us to talk about this experience. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't enough for me. After a few weeks, I still wasn't feeling myself. I cried uncontrollably, I couldn't sleep, and every time I closed my eyes, the situation was on a reel. I continued to come into work and gave the usual expected response with my peers when asked how I was doing. It wasn't until a friend and coworker intervened and suggested that I might benefit from seeing a professional and my doctor. I didn't see the symptoms in myself and was so grateful for her help. I was able to get treatment and was supported by my workplace to take care of myself. Because of this early intervention, I was able to get to a place where I was no longer suffering from the symptoms that were making everyday life absolutely unbearable. Mr. Speaker, most of us have heard the term post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. It's a disorder caused by the traumatic event that is outside the normal realm of human experience. In PTSD, symptoms continue for more than 1 month and may include flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts, such as reliving the event. PTSD causes significant distress, which can result in impairment of the individual's social interactions, decrease in the capacity to work, or impairment of other important areas of functioning. Some jobs and occupations place people in situations of higher occupational stress. Military personnel, first responders, doctors, nurses, and other frontline workers experience higher rates of PTSD than other professions. Repeated abuse and trauma, such as experience in domestic violence and war, can also result in PTSD. According to the Canadian Mental Health Association, post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental illness involving exposure to trauma, involving death or threat of death, serious injury, or sexual violence, such as rape, assault, torture, being kidnapped or held captive, military combat, severe car accidents, and natural or man-made disasters. The Canadian Forces Mental Health Survey 2013 says PTSD symptoms include repeated reliving of the event, disturbance of day-to-day activity, avoidance of stimuli associated with the event, and irritability, outbursts of anger, or sleeping difficulty. Veterans, frontline workers, emergency personnel, rescue workers, first responders are some of the Albertans who are vulnerable to developing PTSD. The Canadian Forces Mental Health Survey 2013 says that within the Canadian Forces personnel, the rate of PTSD doubled between 2002 and 2012, with about 5.3% of military personnel being affected. As well, according to the Canadian Mental Health Association, PTSD also affects women almost twice as much as it does men. Refugees are more prone to PTSD, and Aboriginal people who attended residential schools have higher chances of suffering from PTSD. Mr. Speaker, when I decided to bring forward this legislation several months ago, I started consulting with groups and individuals who have worked with PTSD issues directly, individuals with PTSD, as well as family members whose loved one has PTSD. I feel truly honored to have had the incredible opportunity to hear from so many Albertans who in some way have been impacted by post-traumatic stress disorder. The courage and the trust that it takes to share their story is something that I really admire. Knowing that telling their story is part of breaking the stigma that for too long has been associated with PTSD. In the last 2 months, I have reached out to over 40 stakeholder groups comprising of frontline workers, including corrections officers, social workers, workers with Child and Family Services, Alberta Health Services Emergency, RCMP, Edmonton Fire Services, Edmonton Police Services, people from the Canadian Forces Health Services, Veterans Affairs Canada, the Canadian Military, Military Family Resource Centre, and a spouse who has run peer support groups, the Faculty of Rehabilitation Medicine, Indigenous community representatives, members of the LGBTQ+ community, unions, settlement and immigration agencies serving refugees and newcomers, journalists, emergency roadside assistant workers, as well as physicians and psychologists. The list is endless, Mr. Speaker, and the powerful truth is that anyone can be impacted. PTSD can affect our parents, our siblings, our children and our grandchildren, our co-workers, and our neighbors. I have heard that individuals affected by PTSD will struggle to identify that they are suffering and often blame themselves or see this as a weakness, when really, as Brigadier General Eyre articulated so well in his statements to me, this is a normal reaction for many when facing abnormal circumstances. Mr. Speaker, these stakeholders from diverse backgrounds have all indicated one common understanding, and that is we need a better awareness and advocacy for PTSD. And Mr. Speaker, that is what this bill intends to do. By dedicating a day, June 27th, as the PTSD Awareness Day in our province, we will raise awareness and educate the general public about PTSD, its causes, symptoms, who is most affected, and how to find supports in Alberta. Mr. Speaker, a lack of awareness is increasing the stigma associated with PTSD and putting people's lives at risk. Through this piece of unique legislation, we will create a day to raise awareness and educate the general public about PTSD, its causes, symptoms, who is affected, and how to find supports. The day would highlight those most affected, such as the veterans, frontline workers, emergency personnel and rescue workers, first responders, as well as those who have experienced trauma, such as survivors of residential schools and refugees who have escaped war. It would educate the public about the long-term effects and triggers and recognize the importance of accurate and early diagnosis. Given the shame that still exists for those suffering PTSD, the day would serve to raise awareness and aim to reduce this stigma amongst those with PTSD, their friends and families, and within Albertan communities. June 27th is the National PTSD Day in the United States. In Canada, we do not have a PTSD Awareness Day Act yet. Mr. Speaker, we might be leading the way here in Alberta. The fire in Fort McMurray is still prominent in all of our minds. The fast action, dedication, and hard work of the first responders has saved 90% of the structures in the city of Fort McMurray. Mr. Speaker, while PTSD has a relatively high profile, it is only one of the several possible operational stress injuries, OSI. The Government of Alberta is addressing OSI among its workforce and first responders through a cross-governmental OSI working group. This group is led by the Fire Commissioner's Office, Municipal Affairs, and includes Labour. The bill will create a bigger picture in constructing awareness and a support mechanism. Now is the time to legislate a day dedicated to PTSD awareness. It's the right thing to do. I encourage all members of the Assembly to unanimously support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank all of my colleagues in this Assembly for their valuable contributions in this discussion and for their unanimous support of this bill. It's encouraging to see cooperation and agreement from all members that raising awareness around post-traumatic stress disorder in our province is critically important. By recognizing June 27th as Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder PTSD Awareness Day in Alberta, this bill will raise awareness and help educate the public about PTSD, its causes, symptoms, and where to find support. Bill 206 is important to me on a personal level. I spoke previously of my background in frontline social work, and through it, my exposure to trauma and its profound effects on families. My current role as liaison to the Canadian Forces and MLA in a constituency with a high concentration of military families has heightened my awareness of the effects of PTSD on our veterans, their families, and their communities. But consultation on this bill drove home that PTSD affects all segments of society. Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Awareness Day will recognize the lived experience of those suffering from PTSD, including refugees and survivors of residential schools, victims of crime, veterans, frontline workers, emergency personnel, first responders, and corrections officers. Mr. Speaker, this bill supports Albertans suffering from PTSD to access the support and treatments that they need. That is why I'm proud to bring forward Bill 206 and receive the unanimous support of this Assembly. Thank you, Madam Speaker.